Every rancher said a woman could not run a cattle drive. She brought the herd in under budget. The herd was 840 head of mixed longhorn and shorthorn, and the herd needed to move 200 miles north from the Brazos River country to the railhead at Abilene. And the moving needed to happen before November, because November was the end of the shipping season, and the end of the shipping season was the end of the money, and the end of the money was the end of the ranch, and the end of the ranch was the thing Jessamine Pryor would not allow. Jessamine was 31 years old. She had inherited the ranch from her father, Calvin Pryor, who had died in June of a heart that simply stopped, the stopping sudden and final and without the decency of warning, because warning would have allowed preparation, and preparation would have allowed Calvin to arrange the drive before the dying. And the not arranging was the problem that Calvin left behind along with 840 head and 1,200 acres and a daughter who knew how to run a ranch, because Calvin had taught her how to run a ranch, had taught her deliberately and thoroughly, and without the condescension that other fathers applied to daughters, the condescension that says, "You are learning this for amusement and not for use," and Calvin had meant it for use, and the use was now. The problem was the drive. The problem was not the logistics. Jessamine understood the logistics, understood the route and the water stops and the timing and the daily mileage that a herd could sustain without losing weight, and weight loss was the enemy, because weight loss was money loss, and money loss was the thing the ranch could not absorb. The problem was the men. The problem was that the men she needed to hire to work the drive, the drovers and the wrangler and the cook, would not work for a woman, because working for a woman was not a thing they did, the not doing a custom as rigid as any law, and more enforced than most, because custom is enforced by ridicule, and ridicule is the punishment that men fear more than fines. She tried to hire a trail boss. She went to Waxton, to the saloon where the trail bosses gathered in the fall to negotiate drives, and she stood in the saloon and said she had 840 head that needed to reach Abilene before November, and the standing in the saloon was the violation of the custom that said women do not stand in saloons and negotiate cattle drives, and the violation was received the way violations are always received, with silence first, then laughter, and the laughter was the answer, and the answer was no. Harley Rourke was there. He was 37 years old. He was a drover, not a trail boss, a man who worked cattle for other men's wages, and who had been working cattle since he was 15, and whose 22 years of working cattle had given him the skills of a trail boss without the title, because titles are not given to men who do not seek them, and Harley did not seek titles. Harley sought competence, and competence was the thing he had. He did not laugh. The not laughing was the thing Jessamine noticed, the way you notice the one face in a room that is not doing what all the other faces are doing, the one face that is still while the others are laughing, the stillness the evidence of thinking rather than reacting, and thinking is the quality that separates useful men from useless ones. "I will work your drive," Harley said. He said it after the laughter stopped, said it into the silence that follows laughter, the silence that is the space where serious things can be said, because the unserious thing has passed, and the passing creates the opening. "I am not a trail boss. I am a drover, but I have been on 14 drives, and I know the Brazos to Abilene route, and I know the water, and I know the grass, and I know the pace, and the knowing is the qualification, and the qualification is sufficient." "I need 6 men," Jessamine said. "I need a wrangler and a cook and 4 drovers. And the needing is the problem because the men in this room will not work for a woman. I know men who will. I know men who care about wages more than custom, and wages are the argument, and the argument is sufficient for men who need money, and everyone in this room needs money, and the needing money will overcome the custom if the wages are fair." The wages were fair. Jessamine offered top dollar, $30 a month per drover, $35 for the wrangler, $40 for the cook, and the top dollar was the argument that Harley had predicted, the argument that overcomes custom, because custom does not pay rent and wages do. Harley assembled the crew. He assembled them from the men he knew, men who were competent and reliable, and hungry enough to work for a woman, because the working for was the wage, and the wage was the thing that mattered, and the thing that mattered overrode the thing that offended, and the overriding was the pragmatism of men who live by their labor, and whose labor does not have the luxury of prejudice. The crew arrived at the ranch on a Monday. They arrived with their horses and their gear, and their skepticism. The weight they carried in addition to their saddles, the weight of men who have agreed to do something they are not sure about, the agreeing motivated by wages, and the not sure motivated by custom, and the two motivations coexisting the way oil and water coexist, side by side but not mixed. Jessamine met them at the corral. She met them without apology and without explanation, because apology admits error, and she had committed no error, and explanation assumes ignorance, and she was not ignorant. She was the owner of 840 head, and the daughter of a man who had taught her everything, and the everything was the qualification, and the qualification did not require explanation. The cook, a man named Pardee, looked at Jessamine, and then looked at Harley, and the look said, "Are we serious?" And Harley's look back said, "We are serious." And the exchange of looks was the negotiation that happens between men when words are unnecessary, because the looks contain the words, and the words were, "Give her a chance," and the chance was the first day, and the first day would produce the evidence, and the evidence would settle the question. The drive began in September. It began the way all drives begin, with the slow gathering of 840 head from the draws and the creek bottoms and the brush, the gathering of patient labor that takes days, and that requires riders who understand that cattle do not respond to urgency. Cattle respond to pressure, and pressure is the steady application of presence, the presence of a horse and a rider at the edge of the herd, saying, "This way, this direction, this is where we are going." Jessamine rode point. She rode point because point was the position of the leader, the position at the front of the herd that sets the direction and the pace, and the setting was the authority, and the authority was the thing the men needed to see, not the authority of a title, but the authority of position, the physical authority of the person at the front, who goes first, and who faces the obstacles first, and whose facing first is the leadership. The first obstacle was the Brazos crossing. The Brazos was running high from September rains. The running high a danger, because a river that is running high can drown cattle and drown men, and drowning is the risk, and risk management is the skill, and the skill was Jessamine's. She found the crossing point upstream, where the river widened and the current slowed, the finding a knowledge that came from Calvin, who had shown her the crossing points when she was 16, and who had said, "Remember these, because someday you will need them," and the someday was now. The herd crossed without loss. 840 head went in on the south bank and 840 came out on the north bank, and the zero loss was the evidence, the first evidence that the men received, the evidence that said this woman knows what she is doing, and the knowing was demonstrated rather than asserted, and demonstration is more persuasive than assertion, because demonstration cannot be denied, and assertion can. Harley watched Jessamine at the crossing. He watched her ride the upstream flank, keeping the lead cattle aligned with the far bank, the keeping a skill that requires reading the current and the cattle simultaneously, reading two languages at once, the language of water and the language of animal, and the reading was fluent, and the fluency was the respect that Harley felt forming the way a river forms, slowly, following the natural contour of the landscape being Jessamine's competence, and the contour being Harley's recognition of it. "You ride well," Harley said. He said it that evening, at the fire, the nightly gathering where the crew ate and talked, and the talking was the bonding that turns a collection of hired men into a unit. The saying was the compliment, and the compliment was spare, because spare compliments are the currency of men who work with cattle. Men who work with cattle do not decorate their language. They trim it the way they trim hooves, down to the functional, and functional was, "You ride well," and functional was enough. "I ride the way my father taught me to ride," Jessamine said. "He taught me to ride and to read cattle and to find water, and to navigate by stars, and the teaching was the inheritance, and the inheritance was more valuable than the land and the herd. because the land and the herd are things, and things can be taken, but knowledge cannot be taken. Knowledge stays, and staying is the quality that makes knowledge the superior inheritance. The drive continued north. It continued through the Indian Territory, through the rolling grass and the wide sky, and the particular silence of the plains that is not silence, but the sound of grass and wind. The grass and wind being the music of the drive, the music that plays constantly, and that the drovers stop hearing after the first week, because the hearing becomes automatic, and the automatic is the absorption, the absorbing of the landscape into the body, until the landscape and the body are the same thing. One night at the fire, Jessamine told Harley about Calvin. She told him about the teaching, about the mornings when Calvin had taken her to the corrals at dawn and shown her how to read a cow's eyes, how the eyes tell you whether the animal is calm or frightened or sick. And the telling is the language. And the language is the first thing a cattleman learns. And Calvin had taught her that language before he taught her to read English. Before a deliberate choice that said this language matters more, because this language keeps you alive, and English only keeps you informed. He knew I would need this, Jessamine said. He knew that he would die before the ranch was finished, because ranches are never finished. Ranches are ongoing, and ongoing requires succession, and succession requires teaching, and the teaching was the love, and the love was the ranch. Harley listened. He listened the way he did everything, without interruption, with the attention of a man who understands that listening is the act that precedes understanding, and understanding is the act that precedes respect, and respect was the thing growing between them in the firelight. There were problems. There were always problems on a drive. A horse went lame and had to be replaced from the remuda. A steer broke its leg in a gopher hole and had to be put down. 2 days of rain turned the trail to mud, and the mud slowed the pace, and the slowing threatened the schedule. Jessamine handled each problem the way Calvin had taught her, by assessing, deciding, and acting. The 3 steps performed in sequence, without panic, because panic is the enemy of assessment, and assessment is the foundation of good decisions. Harley noticed that the men stopped talking about her as the woman and started talking about her as the boss. The transition happened around day 12, which was the day Jessamine navigated the herd through a narrow pass where a herd had stampeded the previous spring, navigated it by splitting the herd into thirds and moving each third through separately, the splitting a technique that reduces the panic density of a herd in a confined space, and the reducing was the expertise, and the expertise was the transition from woman to boss. They reached the Red River. The Red River was the border of Kansas, and Kansas was the destination, and the destination was close. 4 days north to Abilene, 4 days to the railhead, 4 days to the money that would save the ranch. The Red River crossing was clean, another zero-loss crossing. The zero loss the record, because zero loss on 2 major river crossings is the record of a well-run drive, and well-run was what this drive was. Jessamine did the accounting in her head. She did the accounting every night. The wages paid, the supplies consumed, the days remaining, the price per head at Abilene. The accounting said she would bring the herd in under budget. Under budget meant the ranch survived. Under budget meant Calvin's work endured. Under budget meant the men in the saloon who had laughed were wrong, and being wrong is the education that custom requires to change, and change was what Jessamine's drive was producing. Not just cattle at a railhead, but a change in what men believed a woman could do. They reached Abilene on October 19th. 839 head. 1 lost to the gopher hole, 0 lost to river, 0 lost to stampede, 0 lost to theft. 839 out of 840 was the record. The record that spoke louder than any argument. The record that said this drive was run by a person who knew what she was doing. And the person was a woman. And the womanness did not diminish the competence. Harley found Jessamine at the cattle pens after the sale. She was standing at the fence watching the last of the herd be loaded into rail cars, the loading the end of the drive and the beginning of the next thing, and the next thing was the ranch, and the ranch was saved. You brought them in under budget, Harley said. I brought them in the way my father would have brought them in. The way is the method, and the method does not know whether the person applying it is a man or a woman. The method only knows whether the person is competent, and competence is not gendered. The men respect you. The men respect the result. The result is the thing that earns respect, not the person. The person is the vehicle, and the vehicle is irrelevant when the result is 839 head at the railhead in October, with money left over. I respect you, Harley said, not the result. You, the person who rode point through 2 river crossings and a narrow pass, and 12 days of rain, and who did not panic, and who did not quit, and who did not ask for help she did not need. Jessamine looked at Harley. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the saloon. The one face that was not laughing. The one face that was still. The stillness, the thinking. And the thinking was the respect. And the respect was the beginning. And the beginning was now, at the cattle pens in Abilene, with the herd sold and the ranch saved, and the budget intact, and a man standing at a fence who had not laughed. You were the only one who did not laugh, Jessamine said. Laughing is what men do when they do not know what else to do. I knew what to do. I knew to listen. I listened, and I heard a woman who knew cattle, and who knew the route, and who knew what she needed, and the knowing was the reason I signed on, and the signing on was the best decision I have made. Will you come back to the Brazos? I will come back to wherever you are, and the wherever is the commitment, and the commitment started in the saloon when I did not laugh, and it will continue as long as you will have it.